Welcome back to Deciding Iowa. Here we are at episode 4 of 6 of our special series on water. I'm Dr. Shawn Ellerbrook, and I'm a cancer scientist, biochemistry professor, and Iowa House District 57 candidate.
And I'm Dr. Emily Boevers. I'm an OBGYN, mother of 3, and a health advocate.
Emily, let's catch up on what we've learned so far, and we've learned quite a bit. We have nutrient and chemical release from non-point sources like agriculture fields, CAFOs, and urban landscapes. Mm-hmm. We need to do a better job of limiting water use permits and tracking water quality. We generate enormous amounts of manure in this state, and that combined with synthetic fertilizers contribute much to our water contamination. The state has a nutrient reduction program to limit that contamination, but there are real obstacles for effective implementation and recommended practices. If the state is going to be successful, Emily, in reducing nutrient and chemical release into our water, we need to have a discussion about the limitations and concern of our current row crop system.
Very nicely summarized. So let's jump right back into the field with our conversation with Dr. Helmers.
It sounds like you have so much good work going on and so many options, and yet I'm concerned about the level of nitrates that we're seeing. What do you think the source of this ongoing contamination is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It gets kind of at some of the root cause of the problems that we see. And I'll start off with saying that, in Iowa we have 36 million acres. We have about 24 million acres that are under annual row crop production. And, about 13 million of those are corn, and corn is the crop that gets fertilized with nitrogen. Okay, soybeans, we don't generally fertilize for nitrogen. They still get other nutrients, but there's not a need for external nitrogen. So as we look at this, we need to do a better job with nitrogen management. That's where it starts, that we try to make sure that those nutrients that we put on, that the farmer may have paid for, whether that be paid somebody to apply manure or commercial fertilizer, we get as much of that into the plant as possible. But I think, so that, that it has to start there. But one of our challenges is that we have an annual cropping system where once we had a perennial. And so our annual cropping system grows a smaller portion of the year than did the prairie and native vegetation that we had. Okay. And so what we found is that from our research, and some of it over 30 years, even when we applied the best nitrogen management practices to kind of optimize or get an economic return for the corn crop, we still lose nitrate and many times at levels above the drinking water standard for nitrogen. We've found that even when we apply no nitrogen in a corn-soybean rotation, so we have a site in northwest Iowa that we've done this for about going on 10 years. We have specific plots that get no nitrogen, so corn, soybean, no nitrogen. And then we have corn, soybean with a common fertilization rate. And we might see about 12 milligrams per liter or parts per million of nitrate nitrogen coming out when we apply fertilizer at that common fertilization rate. And we might see 8 when there's no fertilizer applied. But we still are seeing 8 when there's no fertilizer applied. In comparison, if we had on other plots, not at the same site, but other similar type plots, when we have a prairie out there, we see well less than 1 part per million, about 0.5, even when we fertilize that prairie with nitrogen to try to maximize above ground biomass. So
that's incredible.
So one of the things is that we have this annual cropping system. Sometimes we refer to it as a leaky system, because one of the challenges then, if there's not much growing in the fall and not much growing in the spring, and then most years, when do we get our excess precipitation? It's in the spring of the year. And so that's when we leach a lot of nitrate out of that system. And so that's why things like cover crops can be so maybe can work so well is, in a way, they're mimicking a more natural system of having something growing in those shoulder seasons. So, there's opportunities for improvement in nitrogen management, absolutely. But we also have to recognize that we have this annual cropping system out there that, that we need to think about how we have something growing out there, have roots in the soil, have something taking up some of that nitrate out of the soil profile a greater percentage of the year.
Does that also relate to like the no-till activity, and does that help?
I'm glad you asked that, because no-till has all kinds of benefits, but our research, actually not too far away from here, up at the Northeast Iowa Research Farm, what we've seen is that no-till doesn't help us much, at least on a consistent basis, reduce nitrate.
Okay.
There's still a lot of, and what it may do in some cases is it works so well that it increases how much water moves through the soil profile. Because instead of having that water run off, now when we have no-till, which is what we want it to infiltrate, but then it may be leaching out. And so some of our systems, what we would see is that the nitrate concentration might go down slightly with no-till, but the amount of water increases. And so if we're increasing how much water moves through there without a real big decrease in concentration, we're losing about the same amount of nitrate. Now this is where I just want to say, I talked about earlier about the phosphorus. We've implemented a lot of those. We've decreased the amount of tillage that happens on our agricultural landscapes since the 80s. So if we look at that, there's more no-till or reduced till or strip till now than there was at that point in time, which is good for soil loss and phosphorus loss with that runoff. But unfortunately, not on the nitrate standpoint.
When you look at, we've got 2 row crops that take up a huge amount of what we put in the ground. Yeah. What about crop diversification if we did more wheat or oats or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that, since I've been back in Iowa, and they have talked about it for decades before that, we need a third crop in Iowa. And, especially if that third crop, small grain, we're growing in that spring period. That's kind of one of the practices on the nutrient reduction strategy menu, is kind of those extended rotations where maybe we have corn, soybeans, and then a small grain, and maybe even alfalfa for a couple years. But yes, I think that those small grains are using water and taking up nitrate at different times of the earlier in the year, that may help us reduce some of that nitrate loss. And so I think about, are there opportunities for small grains? Are there opportunities for more forage needs? Alfalfa, those types of things that might help diversify that landscape out there a little bit. And I think those, crop diversification is another one of those tools that may not work everywhere, but in certain areas there may be local markets to utilize some of those, either small grains or forage.
Well, and thinking about, everybody has a role to play, and what is at stake for folks, without getting too deep in the policy weeds, economically, many of our smaller farms and farmers, can they afford to introduce a third crop? Is it financially viable?
Do they have the equipment? Do they have
all of those? I'm a farmer's daughter, but I grew up about 10 miles from here. And so, I think about the people that I know that farm, and that's a real consideration and a real hardship to put on them.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly correct. And that is why I think kind of having that suite of practices, because if there are incentives for maybe implementing some of these edge of field practices, once they're implemented, it's not like you're adding labor or minimal labor to somebody's operation. But if you're moving to cover crops, that is a more intensive system, and labor is is in short supply for many of our farmers in the state of Iowa. So I think this is a very big, it's a big scale problem, and there's lots of different facets to it for sure.
There's not an easy button. There's not one thing that if you had a recommendation.
And that's why, you know, if sometimes it's intimated that, you know, if we just don't put on as much fertilizer, we'll have no problem. That absolutely can help us, but I think it doesn't get at kind of the root cause of the problem that we have. And you know, so we have to look for opportunities for, you know, how we increase that, how we provide, you know, maybe provide opportunities for people to implement some of those other crops and provide some level of, you know, again, ag engineer, not a policy, but you know, some level of assurance that you're gonna, you know, that you're gonna be
incentivize everyone to make the decisions that might help. Yeah.
We need to do a better job of nitrogen management, and I was impressed by Dr. Helmer's comments about perennial versus leaky annual crops.
Yes.
It was a clear call to keep advancing cover crop. Perhaps a third small grain crop in the spring is needed to help address nutrient runoff into our water.
I am skeptical about the economics of a third crop. The agriculture industry is so hyper-focused on corn, secondarily beans, that there's just not a lot of feasibility for your average family farmer to adopt a third crop practice. Many individual farmers will not find this to be cost effective without incentives.
Yeah, I agree, and we need more research like oat seed development and programs that buffer farmers when they attempt to diversify their crop portfolio. And, you know, honestly, the average farmer is getting older in Iowa. And what we're talking about here will require significant extra labor requirements.
You know, we've discussed incentivation approaches to encourage the best nutrient reduction practices, but I think we also need to consider that current approaches are really limiting and with weak penalties for non-compliance. The real conundrum here is that we're relying on voluntary adoption, which only some people will partake in, versus mandatory nutrient reduction for everyone with support. That's what we need for clean water.
Well, in our next episode, we will ask our experts to discuss policy options for water protections, as well as hearing their closing thoughts. See you then.
Thanks.